welcome to your deep dive. You guys sent in Apostle Orokpo Michael's sermon, Ankazo, the Compelling Power of the Spirit.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm excited to dig into this.
This is going to be good.
I have a feeling this is really going to resonate with a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So let's jump right in. What stood out to you right off the bat?
Well, I think what's fascinating is how Apostle Michael kind of immediately challenges us to rethink what power even is.
Yeah.
He's not talking about some abstract theological concept.
Right.
He's talking about like a tangible force, a lived experience that goes beyond, cultural differences or demographics even.
And it's not about knowing all the right answers or putting on a show. It's about something much deeper.
It's about a genuine power that draws people to God,
Exactly. And he uses the example of John the Baptist to illustrate this point.
Yeah, John wasn't a flashy guy.
Right.
But his ministry attracted people from all walks of life.
Yeah, there was something undeniably powerful about him.
Yeah, his message and the way he lived just drew people in.
Okay, so how do we tap into that kind of power?
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And Apostle Michael argues that a lot of Christians are actually missing this power. And that's why they struggle to overcome life's challenges.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's like they're trying to fight a spiritual battle with, like, earthly weapons. You know what I mean?
I do.
And that's where his idea of the crisis power paradox comes in, which I think is really interesting.
I'm super intrigued by that. It's like he's saying that the very things that challenge us can actually become catalysts for spiritual growth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He actually shares a very personal story about experiencing paralysis.
Wow.
During a service where many others were being healed. And it was this crisis that exposed his own need for a deeper level of spiritual power.
Yeah, sometimes it takes those moments when we're really struggling to realize how much we need God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It forced him to confront his own limitations.
Yeah.
And seek a greater reliance on God.
That's powerful. So it's like those moments when we feel the most helpless actually push us to a place where we can experience true breakthrough.
You got it. It's like the breaking point becomes the turning point.
Wow. I like that.
And what's really interesting is that Apostle Michael outlines 3 specific pillars for attaining and wielding this compelling power.
3 pillars. Okay, I'm ready. Let's break those down. What's the first one?
Okay, the first pillar is the encounter with Jesus.
Okay.
But he's very clear that it's not just about knowing about Jesus intellectually.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who know about Jesus but haven't really encountered him.
Exactly. It's about experiencing Jesus in a deeply personal and transformative way.
Like a relationship.
Yeah, like a real relationship, not just head knowledge.
He talks about sonship, too.
Right. He talks about how it's different from just being a child of God. Sons inherit and wield true authority.
I see. So it's about stepping into that inheritance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he even mentions people like Bob Jones and the prophet who met Anna Rontry in heaven as examples of those who dwell in this constant state of encounter.
Wow.
It makes you wonder what that actually looks and feels like to be so connected to the divine that it shapes your entire being.
It really does. Like, what does that level of intimacy with God look like in everyday life?
Right. And he uses the story of Moses, whose face literally glowed after encountering God on Mount Sinai.
Yeah, that's a pretty vivid image.
Right. It's a powerful visual that highlights the transformative nature of those encounters.
Okay, so encountering Jesus is the foundation.
That's right.
What's the next pillar?
All right. Second pillar is the move of the Spirit.
Okay.
And this is all about recognizing the Holy Spirit's active role in our lives and allowing him to move freely through us.
So it's not about our own charisma or effort?
No, it's about surrendering to the Holy Spirit's power.
Right.
And allowing him to work through us.
It's about letting go of control.
Exactly.
Letting God take over.
And he emphasizes a key indicator of this, which is an unending hunger for God.
Ah, I remember him talking about that.
That's so important.
Yeah.
He uses the example of King David
and
his passionate pursuit of God's presence.
Yeah, David wasn't satisfied with just a little taste of God.
Right. He craved it constantly.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of hunger that Apostle Michael's talking about.
That deep desire for more of God.
Exactly. It's a driving force that propels us deeper into relationship with him.
So we have encounters with Jesus and the move of the Spirit. What's the third pillar?
Okay, so the third pillar is super fascinating because he dives into 4 different Greek words for power.
4. Okay, I'm ready for this.
It gets a little complex here.
All right, bring it on.
He starts with exousia.
Exousia.
Which is the positional power we have because of our relationship with Christ.
Okay.
Think of it as the authority that a child of a king would have.
Like an inherent
Exactly. It's inherent, but we can grow in it through a deeper revelation of who Jesus is.
So understanding who Jesus is actually empowers us.
You got it. The more we know him.
The more authority we walk in.
Exactly. Then there's dunamis.
Okay, dunamis.
This is power activated by the Holy Spirit, especially through praying in tongues.
So like a supernatural energy.
Yeah, he talks about how this practice can literally energize and empower us.
He mentioned the Azusa Street revival, too.
Oh, yeah. He talked about how they were known for spending hours in prayer.
Including praying in tongues.
Exactly.
Is he suggesting that's how they were tapping into that power?
I think so. It was a key part of their experience.
That's interesting.
And that leads us to kratos,
Okay, quite.
which is more about strength that's built through consistent engagement with God.
So like a spiritual stamina.
Exactly. Like, think of it like an athlete training their muscles.
Yeah.
Over time, through prayer, obedience, and facing challenges, we develop this kratos.
So it's not a one-time thing, it's a process.
Exactly. It's about building that spiritual endurance.
Okay, so dunamis is like a burst of energy.
Yeah, like a sudden surge.
And kratos is the strength we build over time.
That's a great way to put it. Then he introduces this final word, ischius,
Ischius.
which is authority that's earned
Okay.
through a lifestyle of submitting to Jesus' authority.
That's interesting.
It's like becoming so aligned with his will
Right.
that his power just flows through us effortlessly.
It becomes second nature almost.
Exactly, like we're operating on his frequency.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these different types of power work together.
Me too. It's kind of like a puzzle, isn't it?
It is, but how do we actually experience them? Like, how do we make this real in our lives?
Well, he uses a really interesting story to illustrate the difference between dunamis and kratos.
Oh, I'm curious.
He talks about this guy, Dr. Paul, who was praying for a patient in a coma. And through prayer, he was able to break a witch's pot.
Whoa, hold on.
In the spiritual realm,
That sounds intense.
it is a pretty wild story.
Yeah. So what's the point?
Well, the key is that he wasn't relying on some sudden burst of power. He had this readily available strength
Right.
that had been built through consistent spiritual practice.
So it's not just about having one powerful experience.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating that inner strength over time.
You got it. It's about the daily grind, the discipline, the commitment.
It makes me think of all the athletes who train for years to compete for just a few minutes.
Exactly. It's the same principle.
And that brings us to a crucial point.
Okay.
Apostle Michael emphasizes that Christianity isn't just about believing the right things, it's about living them out.
It's about putting faith into action.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's about actively cultivating the spiritual power through consistent practice.
It's a lifestyle, not just a Sunday morning thing.
I love that. It's about integrating these principles into our everyday lives.
And what really strikes me
Yeah.
is how he connects all of this back to that initial idea, the crisis power paradox.
Right. It all comes full circle.
He's saying that the challenges we face in life actually reveal our level of spiritual power or lack thereof.
Wow. That's a powerful thought.
It makes you wonder, am I facing my challenges with the kind of spiritual strength that Apostle Michael is talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask ourselves.
I think it's a question we all need to wrestle with.
Yes.
And that's what makes this message so compelling.
Right.
It's not just about understanding spiritual power, it's about experiencing it in our own lives.
I'm ready to dive deeper. What else does he say about how we can practically cultivate this kind of power?
He gets into some really practical advice about that. Well, he really emphasizes the importance of prayer,
Okay.
but not just any kind of prayer.
Right.
It's about engaging in deep,
Yeah.
transformative prayer that leads to those powerful encounters with God.
Right. The kind of encounters we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond the surface level
Yeah.
and really connecting with God on a heart level.
It's not just about going through the motions.
No, it's about entering into his presence
Yeah.
with a sense of awe and reverence.
Right. Like really being present with God.
Exactly. With that unending hunger that we talked about.
And I remember he contrasted this with the idea of seeking impartations from others.
Yes. He
Yeah.
was very clear about that.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying that true power comes from cultivating a personal connection with God.
Right. Not relying on external sources.
Exactly.
It's about going to the source.
He actually uses a pretty funny analogy.
Oh, yeah.
He compares people seeking impartations to someone frantically pressing buttons on a device,
Oh, I remember that.
hoping for a quick fix.
It's like a spiritual microwave meal.
Exactly. And it highlights how shallow it is to seek shortcuts.
Instead of doing the hard work of building a relationship.
Right. It's about recognizing that spiritual growth is a journey, not a destination.
It takes time
It does.
and dedication
Yeah,
and a willingness to press into God's presence until something shifts.
absolutely. It's about staying with it even when it's hard.
That reminds me of what he said about the Azusa Street revival.
Oh, yeah.
They were known for spending hours in prayer,
Yeah.
including praying in tongues.
It's like they were intentionally creating space
Yeah.
to encounter God's power.
Expanding their capacity to receive.
Yes, exactly.
And this raises a really important question.
Okay.
Are we, in our modern Christian culture, neglecting that vital aspect of spiritual development?
It's easy to get caught up in the busyness
It is.
and lose sight of that deep connection
It makes you wonder if we've traded intimacy with God for outward appearances
or intellectual knowledge.
or chasing after the right doctrines.
Yeah, sometimes we focus on the wrong things.
We do.
He contrasts this with the lives of people like Bob Jones and
Right.
Anna Rountree.
Who seem to have this constant connection with God.
Yeah, like their primary dwelling place
Right.
was in his presence.
It challenges us to consider what our own priorities are.
Absolutely. It's a good gut check.
It definitely pushes me to consider going beyond the surface level of Christianity.
Yeah.
What does it really mean to live in that place of deeper connection?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
Where true power resides.
He even uses Moses as an example,
Yeah.
whose face glowed after spending time with God.
Right. It wasn't just a superficial change.
No.
It was a reflection of an inward transformation.
That radiated outward.
Exactly.
And he connected this idea of encounter with sonship, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about being a child of God. It's about stepping into the fullness of that inheritance, walking in authority and power.
He talks about how sons are entrusted with governmental authority. They're not just receivers of God's power,
Right.
but stewards of it.
So we have a responsibility
Yeah, it's a big responsibility.
to use that power wisely.
Exactly.
It makes me wonder, are we settling for a limited understanding of what it means to be a Christian?
That's a good question to ask ourselves.
Yeah. What if there's this whole realm of power and authority that we're missing out on?
Because we haven't fully grasped the concept of sonship.
Right.
And it's not just about our personal lives either.
Yeah.
Imagine the impact this kind of power could have on our families,
Our communities.
our nation even,
If we were to cultivate this level of spiritual depth,
and authority.
how would it change the way we approach the challenges of our world?
It's mind-blowing to think about.
It is. It's like Apostle Michael is saying that the world needs Christians who aren't just talking about power,
Right.
but walking in it.
People who carry a tangible presence of God.
Yes.
Yeah.
That compels others and brings transformation.
And it all starts with that personal commitment
Yeah.
to pursuing encounters with God
To nurturing that unending hunger for his presence.
and building that spiritual stamina.
It allows us to stand strong even in the midst of the storms,
He's calling us to rise above mediocrity,
to push past our comfort zones.
to step into the fullness of what God has for us.
It's about recognizing that Christianity isn't just a set of beliefs or rituals,
Right.
but a dynamic relationship with a living God
A relationship that releases incredible power within us.
to impact the world around us.
It's exciting to think about, isn't it?
Okay, I'm feeling fired up. But I'm also wondering, how do we put all of this into practice? What are some tangible steps we can take to cultivate this kind of spiritual power?
Well, he actually offers some really practical advice on that.
Okay, so tell me, what are some practical things we can actually do, to cultivate this kind of spiritual power?
Well, he goes back to that idea of practice. It's not just about having, one amazing encounter
Right.
or getting like a download of knowledge.
Yeah.
It's about developing a lifestyle of spiritual discipline and engagement.
So it's a process.
Exactly. He uses that analogy of athletes training for a competition.
Yeah, he talked about that a lot.
They don't just show up on game day
Right.
and expect to win.
They put in the work beforehand.
Exactly. Countless hours of practice,
Right.
pushing their limits, honing their skills.
Yeah.
And he says it's the same with spiritual power.
We have to train.
We have to. We need to be intentional
Yeah.
about building that spiritual muscle.
Okay, so how do we train for the spiritual arena?
He challenges us to kind of rethink our definition of power.
Okay.
He says the strongest among us isn't necessarily the one performing the most spectacular miracles,
Interesting.
but the one who has cultivated the ability to stand in God's presence.
So it's about that inner strength.
Yeah, that unshakable connection with God.
Right. It's about being rooted and grounded.
Exactly. That allows us to walk in true authority and influence.
He gave that example of the 24 elders in Revelation.
Yeah.
They're not out there, performing miracles or preaching sermons,
Right.
but they have this constant access to God's presence.
Continually praising and worshiping him.
Yeah.
Like their very being is just a reflection of God's power and glory.
That's powerful.
It is.
Yeah.
And he suggests that this is what truly changes the world.
So it's not about manipulating people
No.
or forcing our will on them.
Not at all.
It's about aligning ourselves with God
Yes.
so that we become conduits of his power.
He even talks about how individuals who've reached that level of spiritual maturity can actually influence things in the earthly realm
Wow.
that have already been decided in the heavenly realm.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, think about Abraham interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
It's like his relationship with God
Right.
gave him the authority to appeal to God's mercy and potentially alter the course of events.
That's amazing.
It is. It's a profound concept.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does.
Are we content with just, a comfortable Christianity?
Right. Just going through the motions.
Or are we willing to step into something more?
Something that can really impact the world.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have. It's been quite a journey.
It has. What are some of the key things that stand out to you?
Well, I think for me, what really stood out is that spiritual power isn't something we passively receive. It's something we actively cultivate.
It's a journey.
It is. It's a journey of deepening our relationship with God
Surrendering to the Holy Spirit.
and building that spiritual muscle through practice.
And as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave you all with this final thought.
Okay.
What if the pursuit of doing great things for God actually begins with simply being in his presence?
That's beautiful.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. May you be empowered to walk in the fullness of God's power.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.